Jehovah's Witnesses believe that their leaders, the governing body, are a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. Well, like the whole group, like Jehovah's Witnesses, that is also a fulfillment of Bible prophecy, but within that, the leadership, and that's tricky because they don't actually believe that they have human leaders. They think that their only leader is Christ, but if you ask them who takes the lead, they'll tell you the governing body, and the being a leader and taking the lead are different, and this is too confusing of an introduction. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that their leaders, the governing body, are the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. Jesus spoke of a faithful and wise steward, or as the New World Translation puts it, the faithful and discreet slave, and Jehovah's Witnesses believe that the governing body is that fabled, faithful, and discreet slave who provides spiritual food to his followers, Jehovah's Witnesses. And I only know how to do this one gesture. The Theocratic Ministry School failed me. Also, Jehovah's Witnesses have a new study book. This is the book that they use to study with people that they encounter in the ministry to try and eventually bring them into the faith. It is entitled Enjoy Life Forever. Oh, no. Enjoy Life Forever. Oops, I missed something. It says Enjoy Life Forever, an interactive Bible course. Oh my god. Interacting with the Bible course. I'm at Disneyland. This book is constructed really differently from their past study books, which were just paragraph, question, and answer. There is still a tiny bit of that, but a lot of it links to videos on the Jehovah's Witness website, jw.org. There are many pictures, so many that this almost isn't a book. You know when you would have to do a report for school and you kind of put it off to the last minute, so you made the spacing really big and use double spacing between the lines? This is that, but it's a book that people are going to come to your door and try and give you and say, here, be one of my guys now. I'm one of those JW guys. You be one of me. Oh, look who's come to join us. Little Bo. Hey, Bo. Hi. High five. So this book, Enjoy Life Forever, is very simple. Each chapter is formatted exactly the same. There's a couple questions and answers, but very simple wording in the paragraphs, very simple questions, and lots of links to non-reading material like videos. So many videos for every chapter. Videos that have been, of course, produced by Watchtower and are on jw.org. But yeah, a surprising amount of this book is watching videos online. But I was particularly interested in the chapter, the inevitable chapter, on the governing body, the faithful and discreet slave, and how this is justified scripturally, because this is what they use to study with potential converts. And although I've talked about the governing body a few times on the channel, I haven't ever talked about the theological reason for why the governing body exists. So we're going to look at this book, and we're going to specifically hone in on the chapter on the faithful and discreet slave and see what the best arguments are. Can we possibly refute these with facts and logic? Stay tuned! Oh boy. Thank you for being chill all day and choosing now while I'm filming to go completely insane. Jesus is the head of the Christian congregation, Ephesians 5:23. Let's check it. Because a husband is head of his wife, just as the Christ is head of the congregation, he is being a savior of this body. Sentence in the book says Christ is the head of the congregation. That's what this verse says, in addition to husbands being the head of their wives. Cool, chillin', normal, no problems here. Okay, so far so good. 10 out of 10 stars. No notes. A+. Today, from his position in heaven, Jesus directs his followers on earth by means of a faithful and discreet slave. Read Matthew 24:45. Let's check it, baby! Bo has also chosen this time to play with this, like, circular rolling ball on a track thing, which is so loud and is definitely going to pick up on mic. But I can't stop it. What am I going to pick up this little kitty and tell her to do something else? I don't have that kind of power over her. Who really is the faithful and discreet slave whom his master appointed over his domestics to give them their food at the proper time? Wait, what was the question that we were examining again? Today, from his position in heaven, Jesus directs his followers on earth by means of a faithful and discreet slave. And they reference a verse that asks, who is the faithful and discreet slave? So I'm going to deduct them some stars here. This is the proof text. They're saying, here's the big idea that we're presenting.
Today, from his position in heaven, Jesus directs his followers on earth by means of a faithful and discreet slave.
Oh, so there's a guy who's the faithful and discreet slave? No. It's a bunch of people. It's 8 guys. 1 slave. 8 guys, 1 slave. Having received an appointment from Jesus himself, the slave, quotes, would have a certain amount of authority but would remain a slave of Christ and serve Christ's brothers. Who is that slave? How does the slave care for us? They received an appointment from Jesus himself. How do we know this? It doesn't say anything in the book. So there's no evidence to back up this extraordinary claim. And there's also no scriptural evidence of the very basic premise that they're laying forth, which is that Jesus foretold that he would lead his people by means of a slave, but by a slave he meant some guys. So let's look at Matthew 24:45. Oh my God, she tried to kill me. Who really is the faithful and discreet slave whom his master appointed over his domestics to give them their food at the proper time? Let's read the next few verses. Happy is that slave if his master on coming finds him doing so. You had me at on coming finding him doing so. Truly I say to you, he will appoint him over all his belongings. But if ever that evil slave says in his heart, my master is delaying, and he starts to beat his fellow slaves, and to eat and drink with the confirmed drunkards, the master of that slave will come on a day that he does not expect, and in an hour that he does not know. And this is boring. You get it. So, obviously, Jesus is talking in parables, or illustrations, as Watchtower likes to say, which is a pet peeve of mine. I don't ever hear people use the word illustration in real life. And you don't see any scholars refer to Jesus as using illustrations. It's parables. The English-speaking world came together as a human unit and decided it's parable. That's what we say. And Watchtower is like, no. We say a worse thing that's harder to understand. Anyway, he's talking about the second coming of Christ and keeping on the watch, proving yourself ready for that. In fact, the preceding verses are all about the same thing. But Jesus is posing a question here evocatively, as he likes to do.
So who really is the faithful and discreet slave?
Now you will notice, as we were reading the verses, that Jesus starts out with this question, who really is the faithful and discreet slave? And the answer given is not 8 old men with American citizenships who live in upstate New York in the year of our Lord 2021. That's not what the Bible ends up saying, actually. So is it fair to call this a prophecy, though? Is Jesus prophesying that one day there would be a thing called the faithful and discreet slave, and that would be a publishing company that makes books about why you should believe in the faithful and discreet slave? That is not a fair claim. And we can see a parallel account in the book of Luke, chapter 12. And if we start in verse 41, which is just one verse before this faithful and discreet slave business happens, I'm reading from the English Standard Version. Peter said, Lord, are you telling us this parable for us or for all? And the Lord said, who then is the faithful and wise manager whom his master will set over his household to give them their portion of food at the proper time? So, you'll notice that in almost every instance, Watchtower uses the Matthew account talking about the faithful and discreet slave, because the Luke one is immediately preceded by the author making it clear that you know that it's a parable and not a prophecy. But you're just some schmuck on YouTube, you say, meanly, in a way that hurts my feelings. Yes, but the other thing is that Bible scholars, like people who dedicate their lives to understanding the Bible, none of them seem to think that this is a prophecy. Let's look at Albert Barnes, for example, and this is a scholar that Watchtower likes. If you are a witness watching this and you want to check, if you look up Barnes or Albert Barnes in the Watchtower online library, you'll see his name pop up a lot. They reference his commentaries. Here is his commentary on the parable of the faithful and wise servant. Well, first, he says, this passage is in fact a parable, though it is not expressly so called. The design is to show that his disciples should act as if they were each moment expecting his return. Well, let's stop there. In this translation that he's using, it does not say the faithful and wise servant. It says a faithful and wise servant, which kind of implies that it's not the definitive group. It is just a person. So Barnes says, by the conduct of a faithful and wise servant, Jesus intends to denote a faithful Christian, a servant of God, or a teacher of religion. So scholars, and more importantly, me, agree that this is not a prophecy foretelling the existence of a group of men who would come together and form like a Megatron slave. I don't like that phrase. There's just simply no reason to believe that, and yet that's the central premise of this entire thing. Let's go on, though. Maybe they explain it better. So number one, who is the faithful and discreet slave? Jehovah has always used a man or small group of men to give direction to his people. Uh-oh, I read one more sentence, and that means I have to talk for 10 straight minutes. So let's look at the scriptures they cite. Malachi 2:7. For the lips of a priest should safeguard knowledge, and people should seek the law from his mouth, because he is the messenger of Jehovah of armies. So this is an interesting scripture to cite. It is just a guy, probably Malachi, right, talking about a priest. For the lips of a priest should safeguard knowledge. And he's just saying that it should happen. Like, hey, ideally, the lips of a priest would have some knowledge about priestly things to say. Just like ideally a kitten wouldn't attack me under the table. Maybe they're just trying to say that, like, hey, in oldie Bible times, they had priests and prophets who would serve as Jehovah's representatives. And if that's the case, yes, fine. The other verse they cite is Hebrews 1:1, which says, long ago God spoke to our forefathers by means of the prophets on many occasions and in many ways. So does this prove that God has always used a person or a group of people? Long ago, God spoke to our forefathers by means of the prophets on many occasions and in many ways. Not in all occasions and in all ways. God famously didn't say a ton. Like, he wouldn't say a lot of words. And when he did, it was often to, like, a totally different person in a totally different generation. So basically, Paul is just saying, hey, you know, a long time ago, prophets would occasionally say things on God's behalf. And I don't really think that that's a compelling scripture. Maybe it is for you, wrong person, but for me, I have some questions. This reporter is not satisfied. After Jesus' death, the apostles and elders in Jerusalem took the lead. Acts 15:2. Oh my God, we're going to have to read this whole thing because I'm getting stopped on everything.
After Jesus' death, the apostles and elders in Jerusalem took the lead. Following that pattern, today a small group of elders, the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, provides spiritual food and directs the preaching work. This group is the faithful and discreet slave, whom Jesus appointed, referred to at Matthew 24:45. All members of the governing body are spirit-anointed Christians, who look forward to joining Christ in his heavenly kingdom when their life on earth is over.
So the first claim they make, after Jesus' death, the apostles and elders in Jerusalem took the lead. John Maple just released a really good couple of videos that break this down in a really succinct, clear, and not snarky, and not snide in any way manner. So it's better than this, and ideally you would have already clicked on it and are watching that instead. And Lloyd Evans has kind of dove into this recently. So if you want to learn more about this, those videos are great. JW Facts has a great article that obviously breaks it down. I won't get too much further into it, but yes, sure. Let's accept their premise that elders and apostles took the lead among Christians. That's not a crazy claim. I agree. No notes. Following that pattern, today a small group of elders, the governing body, provides spiritual food and directs the preaching work. This group is the faithful and discreet slave whom Jesus appointed. So there was a leap made. I don't know if you noticed it, but we are now introducing the idea of spiritual food. That you see, when Jesus said a slave, he really meant several guys acting as one composite slave. And when he said they provide food, he meant they give them magazines and books and make videos and stuff. That's what he meant by food. So that's a bit of a leap, and there's no real evidence for this. If you look for spiritual food as a phrase in the Bible, I think it only comes up once, and it is not in this context. All members of the governing body are spirit-anointed Christians who look forward to joining Christ in his heavenly heavenly kingdom when their life on earth is over. So, all members are spirit-anointed Christians. How do we know that? We do not, and you're not allowed to ask. And if you do, that's rude. So take their word for it. Just trust them. Why would they lie about something like that? It's right here in the book they wrote. And then, they believe that they're going to be in heaven with Jesus during the War of Armageddon. So a fun little thing is that when you see pictures of Armageddon with angels doing destructive stuff, that's what the governing body think they're going to be doing. They think they're going to be riding heaven horses with Super Jesus and shooting light arrows at SWAT people. And that's just a crazy thing to think about yourself. I imagine thinking that and just being this video that I had my followers make, I think I'm going to be that guy. The second subheading here is, what spiritual food does the faithful slave provide? So we're just accepting now spiritual food as a thing that Jesus was even talking about. Jesus said that the faithful slave would give fellow Christians their food at the proper time. So the verse doesn't say that, but they have put those words in there in brackets because it must be what he means. That's what we're doing, and we have the truth, so that's what he would have meant, because he would have wanted us to be doing what we're doing. I mean, it just makes sense to put words in the Bible when you think of it that way. The only really interesting thing about this segment is we receive that spiritual food through meetings, assemblies, and conventions, as well as through Bible-based literature and videos that help us to understand God's will and to strengthen our friendship with him. So many things, so much food. What a freaking buffet. So we have another leap here that Jesus was talking about spiritual food. He's always talking about spiritual stuff. I buy it. So he's talking about spiritual food. By spiritual food, he means stuff that Jehovah's Witnesses teach. By that, he really meant videos and magazines and books and stuff. That's the food that Jesus was talking about. He was envisioning JW broadcasting when he was thinking food at the proper time. You have to believe that as a witness. If you're watching this, you believe it. I'm sorry to tell you. That is what you are taught to believe. This segment's called Dig Deeper, and this is interesting because there's actually far less words and way more pictures and links to videos. So the digging deeper seems to involve consuming less information in written form. See why we need the faithful and discreet slave, the governing body. It might be a good time to mention that the governing body are responsible for this publication being written. This book was written by the teaching committee and writing committee. And guess who heads up those departments? Governing body members and their helpers. So the book that the governing body members are writing is telling you, the reader, that you need them. They've got something to lose here. They've got a dog in this hunt, I think is a phrase. See, the thing with them is that they are already governing body members, and they don't have any modern job experience. They live rent-free, literally and figuratively. They live rent-free in all of JW's heads, and they live rent-free in reasonably nice accommodations on a beautiful compound in Warwick, New York. They have no debts. They have no bills. Every meal of theirs is provided for them by their subordinates. They get to travel around to exotic locales and give talks and be adored. And if this were to all go away, they kind of would be screwed. So it's good luck on their part that this book just so happens to think that we need them in order to not die at Armageddon. And that, in fact, if you challenge their authority, that's backdoor to Armageddon City, population U. Jehovah's people must be organized, is their next point. And if you're a witness, you know that they love this point. The fact that things are organized, or at the very least appear to be organized, for Jehovah's Witnesses, the word organization takes place almost an elevated status. Like it becomes something otherworldly, kind of a god unto itself. The organization is a godly place. It is the earthly paradise. So when you hear the word organization, it conjures up so much stuff. And that's why it's so important that they drill this word and its importance into the heads of their followers. And they're going to have to really drill that word in a lot, like all the time, like many times a day, every day, because that word doesn't appear in the Bible. See, if you search for the word organization in the Bible, you get 0 results. On most Bibles, on the study edition of the New World Translation, you get 3 results from the notes, each of which uses the word organization. So they did find a way to get it in the Bible, but I would put it to you, Jehovah's Witness, hypothetically watching this video, if the word organization isn't in the Bible, why is it like the second most important word of your day-to-day life? I think it behooves us to look at these pictures too. They're pretty nuts. So like the first picture is like a family watching Jeffrey Jackson on the TV. And the caption for this like triptych of pictures is, "The governing body provides spiritual food, direction, and practical help for Jehovah's Witnesses around the world." And I guess I just would ask anybody who is a witness watching this, if you showed this picture and these captions to anybody else other than a witness, what do you think they would think of this? Do you think that they would be interested, or do you think that they would be creeped out? Questions to ask yourself, maybe. So the scripture they say is 1 Corinthians 14:33 and 40. 33 says, "For God is a God not of disorder, but of peace." And verse 40 says, "But let all things take place decently and by arrangement." And what this means is you need a hierarchical structure with men at the top who get to write books telling you how to feel about them. And you should fill out time service slips so you know exactly how many hours you spent, and books you placed, and videos you showed. And actually, we should probably make it so that if you don't turn in time, you're not considered to be an active Christian anymore. Like, is that the sense that you get from these verses, or do you just get a sense that generally Paul is saying, like, you know, things shouldn't be like a disaster in your congregation. It would be good if things were decent and arranged? That actually doesn't sound like a really lofty goal. I feel like maybe Paul had low expectations. He's like, I don't need it to be great. I need it to be decent. And I just need it to be arranged. Not even well, just any kind of arrangement. This next point is a little weird. The faithful slave organizes our preaching work. I don't have a problem with that. That's fine. They do indeed organize the preaching work. Jesus emphasized how important preaching is. Read Mark 13:10 and then discuss these questions. Why is preaching work so important to the governing body? Why do we need the faithful and discreet slave to organize this global work? So, definitely not recording this the following day. Jesus talked about preaching and emphasized how important it was. So, this is why it's so important. The faithful slave organizes the most important thing in the literal entire world. Now, I'm not going to get into this, but I would direct you to jwfacts.com, which has a really great in-depth article on whether or not Jehovah's Witnesses are the only ones who preach and what the good news of the kingdom actually is. He said it better than I can, so go read the thing that's better than what I can say. But the main point of this thing is that we need the faithful and discreet slave to organize this global work. And yeah, I guess if you want something really organized, then you have to organize it. And you gotta have people at the top who can organize all the things. So that makes sense. The next point, the faithful slave provides direction. I'm also not going to spend too much time on. Like I've said, John Maple and Lloyd Evans have both recently done videos breaking down Acts 15 and describing why it does not describe a first century governing body, contrary to what Watchtower said. But there are a couple things that I believe are worth noting about this. One of the things they make it a point to emphasize is how did the early Christians react to direction given by the governing body? Whoa, I have a few things to say about this. So already after introducing the concept of a governing body, you are forced to accept that it existed in Bible times, and that even though the governing body, like the words governing body, are not found in the Bible, that it's appropriate to call them a governing body. And if that causes you to stir up images as us being equal to the apostles of old, well, then we simply can't help that. But yeah, by this point in the chapter, they've gone from maybe being skeptical that we need a governing body to those elders that gathered that one time to talk about dudes' dicks. That was a governing body, and we should call it that. And we're going to put it in the notes of our study Bible, by the way. But anyway, the thing they're really trying to emphasize is how did the early Christians react to the direction? So they answer this question with a couple verses in Acts. One is in Acts 15:31. Then, indeed, the congregations continued to be made firm in the faith and to increase in number day by day. The congregation, well, they reacted with rejoicing at the encouragement. That's how we should act today. We should rejoice when we get stuff from the governing body. And look at this. How did Jehovah bless their obedience? Well, it's going to make the congregations continue to be made firm and increase in number day by day. So if we're obedient, we don't necessarily believe them or think that they're trustworthy, but if we obey them anyway, the last thing that they note, well, the penultimate thing that they note is where does the governing body look for guidance when it makes decisions? And the answer is, yeah, they look to God. They look to scriptures. Okay, they expect all of their followers to look at the Bible for guidance, but, none of the followers claim to be directly appointed by Jesus to lead his earthly people into the new system after surviving Armageddon. It's different. So just the fact that they look there, that's not that impressive of a claim. If you ask any Christian religious leader where they look to for guidance, especially if you ask them to write it down for posterity in a book, yeah, they're going to say the Bible and that they pray to God. Anybody can make this claim. So, boo, I say to this claim. The last part, I think, is the most telling about this whole thing. There's a box that ends this entire lesson that says, some people say, If you listen to the governing body, you're just following men. What proves to you that Jesus is leading the governing body? What an interesting exercise in grammar. It does not say what would prove to you or what is something that we use as proof. It is saying what proves to you that Jesus is leading the governing body already. What is currently proving it to you right now? The clear implication in the eye of the student is, ooh, I should already be doing this. And if I'm not doing it, I'm failing. And this is maybe a good point to mention that this chapter comes in the final section of the publication. It's broken up into 4 sections, and it's in section 4. And it also comes an entire section after talking about getting baptized and becoming an unbaptized publisher. So, a hypothetical person just reading this book for fun wouldn't know that this was a thing until almost the very end of the book. Like, here's all of the book up to this point, and then this, here is where you get to the governing body chapter. So that might not be so great. Now, make no mistake, by this point, the student ideally is already baptized or is approaching baptism, so they're already a Jehovah's Witness and have been an unbaptized publisher, which is kind of like a proto-Jehovah's Witness, for a while. They know who the governing body are. Their videos are strewn throughout this entire book. But the fact that the explanation for the faithful and discreet slave doesn't come until the end of the book, I think that this is actually illustrative of how the governing body very sneakily reinforced their power. This book starts out like every other witness publication, talking about how wonderful it would be to be in paradise. How can we do that? We got to get to know the Bible. How do we know the Bible is the Word of God? How do we know that God's name is Jehovah? How can we be God's friend? What's the kingdom? It does all that stuff, and it hooks the person in with promises of paradise and living a clean, healthy, moral life and having a new social structure. Oh, that's so exciting. Oh, man, you want me to come to your church? Okay. Oh, by the way, if you discontinue your study, you'll die at Armageddon. And by the way, we have a group of 8 old guys who make propaganda videos, and there are leaders, but not really. It's just Jesus, but he uses them to say all the stuff. But sometimes they get stuff wrong, and that's not his fault for some reason. But at this point, the person's hooked in. They're buying what the witnesses are selling, and it's decreasingly likely as the study goes on that they'll be able to put all this together and say, hey, wait a minute. Now, a person who's invested 54 chapters of a book with Jehovah's Witnesses, if they're going at the pace of an ideal study, which would be once a week, that's over a year. A person who's already invested that much of their life into something that they're now emotionally attached to, it's going to be harder for them to back out at that point. Because if you don't believe this thing, that kind of means you don't get to believe all the other things. See, it's all intertwined. And you don't get to pick out the things you don't want to believe in. It's all or nothing. And this is why studying with witnesses is deceptive. They're not upfront about their intentions. And they're also not upfront about how the organization works. They kind of bury the governing body right towards the end of the book, as if to say, oh, and by the way, we're the leaders, and if you don't obey us, then we're going to kick you out. Okay, bye. So why would any of this be appealing to a person? We didn't really get into it, but the language is really simple. There's almost zero reasoning from the scriptures. It's just bullet points of doctrine, questions to reinforce the doctrine, and then links to videos to watch. This doesn't seem super appealing to the average person. I think this is because Jehovah's Witnesses are no longer appealing to the average person, if they ever were. They're appealing to people who are willing to look past stuff like that. Not because of stupidity, but because maybe they're at a point where they've lost a loved one, and suddenly they're worrying about their own mortality. Maybe they just got a cancer diagnosis, or maybe they are just a weirdo. Maybe they try praying for the first time, and oh my God, a miracle of miracles, a Jehovah's Witness knocks on the door with promises of encouragement and hope and a new beautiful life in a perfect world. This stuff works if you're emotionally vulnerable. It's why many of us still, in emotionally vulnerable moments, find ourselves thinking, well, what if I went back? Would it be so bad? Could I do it? And once that emotionally vulnerable person is on the hook, Watchtower is going to front load them with all of these incredibly appealing teachings. And you'll notice, as you work your way through the book, decreasingly appealing teachings as it goes on. Section 1, how can the Bible help me? Who is God? How did life begin? How to pray? How I can get more out of the Bible? Wait, how can the meetings of Jehovah's Witnesses benefit you? That's kind of out of nowhere. How I can get the most out of the Bible. Except for the meeting with Jehovah's Witnesses part, that's pretty exciting, normal stuff. And, Section 2, Jesus. How to identify real Christians. Are Jehovah's Witnesses real Christians? How's the congregation organized? Should I get baptized? It's Section 2, and we're starting to ingratiate Jehovah's Witness material into the doctrine to begin to make them inextricable, but it's mostly still about Jesus and the kingdom and really appealing teachings that make people feel all safe and nice. Section 3, how can we show our love for Jehovah? I do love all this stuff I'm learning. How can I do that? Turns out he's kind of got like a list of demands or gentle requests. God's view of blood. How can we be clean in God's eyes? What does the Bible say about sex? What does the Bible say about singleness and marriage? Why do they care who I marry? How should Christians view alcohol? Do all celebrations please God? What it means to be neutral? Why make a dedication and get baptized? See, it's only after all of these incredibly appealing things do we suddenly get into, we are going to monitor how you have sex, who you have sex with, your sexuality, actually, just generally that. No more holidays. You will have to give your life instead of accepting a blood transfusion. So you have to be willing to die for us now. Not us, I'm sorry. Big guy upstairs. Your dad. All of this ending with baptism. So yeah, the faithful and discreet slave stuff is in the final section. It's buried. You have to be willing to go all in on all these other things. And only once they have you there will they introduce the fact that you are going to have to obey everything that these weird old guys say and do. Now, I did not find their reasoning compelling, but if you did, that's fine, and you should tell me in the comments and we can talk about it. And you're all my friends, and we're all just a big happy family, especially the people who give me money, my patrons. They're probably the best family and my best friends. And all of the non-money givers are probably second. But this has been great. We talked about a book with weird vibes. I don't know what my mood deal is, but I hope you enjoyed this kind of weird energy, because I had a good time. Bye!